Let me start with a story. A middle school principal once told me about a student named Marcus. Bright, curious, always the first to raise his hand in science class. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. His grades slipped. He stopped turning in assignments. He started missing school on Mondays. Teachers assumed it was motivation, maybe distraction, maybe adolescence. It was neither. Marcus and his mother had been moving from couch to couch after their rent increased beyond what they could afford. He was not disengaged from learning. He was exhausted. He was uncertain where he would sleep each week. And no amount of after-school tutoring could compete with that level of instability. As education professionals, we are trained to diagnose academic gaps. We look at data dashboards, benchmark assessments, behavioral referrals. But how often do we examine housing patterns with the same urgency? How often do we ask whether a student's performance reflects curriculum alignment or housing disruption? Here is what I have learned working at the intersection of housing and community systems. Stability creates capacity. When families have predictable housing, children have predictable routines. They sleep better. They arrive on time. They can focus. When housing becomes unstable, cognitive energy shifts toward uncertainty and stress. The classroom feels it immediately. This is where the conversation expands. Real estate decisions are not distant economic events. They shape who can afford to live near strong schools. They influence student mobility rates. They determine whether neighborhoods remain accessible or become exclusive. Housing is not a side issue. It is infrastructure for learning. And yet, we rarely include it in our school improvement strategies. We focus on instructional coaching and professional development. Important work, necessary work. But if students are cycling through multiple addresses in a single academic year, instructional excellence alone will struggle to produce consistent results. So what can we do? We can start by tracking student mobility data alongside academic performance. We can partner with local housing agencies to understand trends affecting our families. We can host information sessions on tenant rights and pathways to homeownership. We can lend our voices to community planning discussions, not as political actors, but as advocates for student stability. This is not about expanding your job description beyond reason. It is about recognizing that leadership extends beyond the classroom walls. When educators speak about housing as an educational issue, the conversation changes. Policymakers listen differently. Developers think differently. Communities plan differently. Let me ask you something directly. Have you seen a student's performance shift after a move? Have you noticed patterns tied to neighborhood change? If so, what conversations followed? Or did the moment pass without deeper reflection? If this story resonates, I encourage you to continue the dialogue within your school or district. Share this perspective with a colleague. Raise the question in your next leadership meeting. Because when we connect housing stability to student success, we move closer to addressing root causes rather than symptoms. Marcus eventually stabilized when his family secured affordable housing near his school. His attendance returned. His grades recovered. His curiosity resurfaced. Nothing changed about the curriculum. His environment changed. Stable housing builds stable learning. And stable learning opens doors far beyond the classroom.